Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Ground and Pound podcast, a show where, as always, we're hitting you with them elbows of knowledge. And UFC 326 is here, the baddest motherfucker. Charles Oliveira, Max Holloway, too. You know what it's all about. We're going to break down the entire card, starting off in the early prelims, heading to the main event. And as always, I'm joined by the baddest motherfucker, my co-host, Carlos. What's happening, Carlos?
Absolutely nothing, brother.
And kicking things off in the early prelim opener here at UFC 326, we've got Gaston Bolanos taking on Yeong Lee. Carlos, who you got in this one?
This one here, I'm going to go with Jeong Lee in this. I just feel that on the feet, he's actually pretty solid. You know, he's got pretty good technical striking. Love the work that he does to the body throughout the rounds, and I like the fact that he likes to get off first. So he pressures you, looks for an opening, lets a rip. Plus the fact that he poses the threat of submissions. I feel that against somebody like Bolanos, who does have good stand up, will put up a fight on the feet. But once it gets to the ground, I don't see him having any real resistance for Jeong Lee. I feel that he'll probably just try to survive off his back, probably try to keep him closed, control his wrist. But if he can't do that, Lee is going to land some ground and pound, and he's going to open him up for submission. So I'm going to take Lee to get it done in this one.
Yeah, two for Lee here. Obviously, Lee not originally supposed to fight on this card, taking it on somewhat short notice, but the guy comes in great shape. He'll have a height and reach advantage in this matchup. And the problem with Bolanos, obviously, we know if you're new to MMA or if you're a veteran in terms of watching the UFC week in and week out, you know with Gaston Bolanos that the floor is made of lava with this guy. Credentialed striker, but once it hits the mat, he will struggle. He will not get back to his feet. He will probably give up his back and get choked. 50 professional Muay Thai fights. The guy's got great kickboxing. Nice counter-striking ability, but unfortunately anybody that has some sort of grappling or wrestling, it usually takes him down and submits him or controls him and beats him up. So as Carlos mentioned, obviously a pick here for Lee, in my opinion, even if it is on short notice, because I do think he can pressure him on the feet. The Korean Tiger is a guy that does like to stalk you. He throws nice shots straight down the pipe, and I think that he can level change at any moment and ultimately get this fight to the mat where Lee will be worlds above. He has shown an improvement in his wrestling in that Blake Builder fight. He did try to take the fight to the mat, and I do think that he could definitely come in here and ultimately get this fight to the ground and find the submission. And I just think with Gaston Bolanos is that it's obviously, you know, what his kryptonite is. It's obvious what his weakness is, and guys know that if they come in and just pressure him, get him up against the fence and take him down, that once it hits the mat, they're going to have a lot of success. So give me Lee here. I think on the feet, he's definitely credentialed enough to be able to, you know, kind of hold his own and not get caught by the good striking of Bolanos. But full camp or not, give me Lee to get this one done on the ground. And next up at UFC 326, we've got Rodolfo Bellato taking on Luke Fernandez. Carlos, who you got in this one?
This one, I'm going to go with Fernandez. And I don't know, some of his, when you watch some of his tape and he's striking, it looks pretty effortless, but he's putting guys out. So it looks like either he's got big power or he's fighting guys that don't really have a good beard on him. But what I'm thinking is somebody like Bellato, he can take a shot and he can come back. But you know, if the power is there for Fernandez, Bellato is there to get hit, and he definitely gets hit clean in the beginning of the fight and throughout the fight, obviously. And Fernandez getting him to the ground because Bellato's going to want to get this to the ground once he gets hurt. I don't think that's going to be a very good idea. Not that Bellato's going to get finished. It's just Fernandez has that high level of, you know, competitive jiu-jitsu, same thing as Bellato. And I think he's going to pose a lot of problems on the ground, too. I think he's going to smash Bellato, and I think he's going to look for submissions. If Bellato's hurt and feels that getting it to the ground is going to be his safe space, I think Fernandez gets it done.
Yeah, two for Fernandez here. I've always talked a lot of shit about Bellato. Obviously, you can go back on the channel and talk about the time that he had herpes, and we made fun of him here. Or I mainly did. But Luke Fernandez, to me, he's looked really reasonably impressive. Obviously, it's hard to really gauge about how good a fighter is when they're 6-0. Obviously, stepping into the UFC, they're finishing a lot of their opponents early, especially on Contender Series, one of the quickest knockouts in Contender Series history. But the guy looks well-rounded. He looks like a good athlete. He's very fast on the feet. And I agree with Carlos. When you watch tape on this guy, certain people have a certain sort of swagger about themselves, a certain amount of technique in the way that they throw their punches or the way that they grapple. And you can kind of see that with this guy, that when he throws the hands, it looks effortless. He looks like he has the touch of death, and I wouldn't be surprised if he put Bellato out, because he is extremely hittable. He is a guy that will walk you down in Bellato, that, he wants to be able to get you backed up and really just pressure you, but he leaves himself so open to be hit, to be countered, that I just think in a guy like Fernandez who can, really capitalize on that, and he has that ability to be able to find the kill shot with technique, with precision, as opposed to just, guys like Jimmy Crute that want to use the grappling, or, they're not necessarily a striker by trade. I think a guy like Fernandez that looks very comfortable on the feet can definitely capitalize in Bellato. And I agree with Carlos. I think Bellato's going to come in here and try to grapple, but Fernandez has shown that he can hang with the best on the ground. He's obviously been to a decision as well. I don't necessarily worry about the cardio because of that reason, that he's not just a guy finishing people early in round one and, gassing out. We've not seen what the gas tank looks like, but in this case we have, because he has been to a decision. Bellato, to me, he tends to slow down. He tends to take a licking, and I've not been overly impressed with him so far in the UFC. He's aggressive, so I understand why the UFC likes him. He's a guy that wants to come out and really put on a show for the fans, but ultimately I think the fans are going to be cheering here for Fernandez as he gets his hand raised for a first round knockout. So give me Luke Fernandez to get his debut off right. And next up at UFC 326, we've got Diyar Nurgozhay taking on Rafael Tobias. Carlos, who you got in this one?
I'm going to go with Rafael Tobias in this one. I just don't find either one to be very impressive. Tobias, he's a little reckless as he's coming in, which he could pay for it because Nurgozhay loves to throw that straight. And, he could time it and catch him coming in. But at least Tobias is looking to push the pace of the fight. And if he could try to get this to the ground, he's going to. Now, Nurgozhay, haven't had to see him a lot on the ground, but I just feel that the pressure of Tobias, and he likes to get off first. He's one of those guys that'll push the pace, and Nurgozhay is waiting for a counter. He's kind of just sitting back, waiting, looking to see the opening. But sometimes the opening's just not there for him, and he doesn't take it. And Tobias is going to throw whether the opening's there or not. And I just think it's going to be one of those fights again where he's going to look busy in the eye of the judges. Now, I have seen Tobias get clipped by a shot and get dropped. And, that could happen to anybody. But in most of his fights, he's fighting guys that can hit, and he's coming forward, he's pressing the action, and he's doing the damage. Nurgozhay defensively seems pretty solid, but I just feel he doesn't do enough offensively to get it done. So I'm going to go with Tobias in this.
Yeah, if you haven't watched the Lee Gaston Bolanos breakdown, this is going to sound awfully familiar, hint of deja vu here, but Nurgozhay, once the fight hits the mat, he's getting tapped, and unfortunately that Kazakhstani flag does not seem to be present with him. 2-3 years Dagestan is not going to do this guy any good. So give me Tobias. Tobias, shooter box fighter, good ground game, 6 submission victories. Guy's got power on the feet. He looks like a good physical specimen. If you watch him on Contender Series, throws elbows, nice teep kicks. Pretty impressive in my opinion. Looks like a good athlete. It's really hard to gauge, obviously, because some of the opponents that he is fighting, I do agree with Carlos, aren't necessarily at the highest of level. But 14-1 with 6 submission victories. If he'd had 3 submission victories, I probably still would have taken him over a guy like Diyar Nurgozhay. But Nurgozhay, good kickboxer, a guy that I think is a little bit undersized for 205, and he carries a little bit of chunk around the midsection, in my opinion. And I do think that Tobias can definitely crack. So I think on the feet, it could definitely go either way if both guys get a little bit reckless. I think either guy could definitely land on the other, especially at 205. But I think Tobias is going to come in here smart. UFC debut, off Contender Series, he gets the first round submission against a smaller opponent. I think he can come in here and ultimately look at Nurgozhay's weakness. The ground is made of lava for him. Take him down, sub him. We saw in his previous fight, he was able to get the knockdown. I think you come out here and you just instantly shoot the takedown. You fake the level change. He's the more explosive athlete. He could come out here, get this fight to the mat, and ultimately have success. One of the things I do like about Tobias, even though he is a shooter box fighter, is obviously he does have that aggressive style on the feet, but he also has that on the ground. He looks to do damage with ground and pound. He's not just trying to be a jiu-jitsu wizard or a jiu-jitsu nerd. He wants to land elbows. He wants to hurt you, and I think that's going to open up the submission where Nurgozhay, we know, is weak. So give me Rafael Tobias. I agree with Carlos in the sense that obviously UFC debuts can be a little bit tricky, so he has been caught in the past, and obviously Nurgozhay is a guy that is desperate, and he has landed the head kick like he did on Contender Series in the past, but I think Tobias takes the easy option here, gets it to the ground, and ultimately finds that rear naked choke. And next up at UFC 326, we've got Jesus Aguilar taking on Sumudaerji. Carlos, who you got in this one?
I'm going to go with Aguilar in this one. I feel that he loves the pressure, loves to strike, loves to get the takedown, always moving, doesn't just stand in front of his opponent, but can get caught coming in by something. Sumudaerji's got that long right hand, and if he gets caught standing in front of him, darting inside, he can get shot. He can get caught with it. But the thing is, he needs to close the distance. Needs to find a way to do it, and he's going to need to slip on the way in. He's going to have to get his hands up, and he's going to have to chain a few takedowns together, which he does anyway. And he's usually the shorter fighter in most of his fights. Taking down his opponents can be difficult, especially somebody like Sumudaerji, who's tall, who's been working on his takedown defense. It seems every time you got him up in the air, he's got a limb down and he's getting his base. So it always seems like you're never going to take it. You chain a few together. He may even end up on top of Aguilar in a wild scramble. But from the bottom, I think Aguilar can scramble. He can attack his base, get back to a better position. And once it's on the ground, I think that's, Aguilar's going to get it done. But I just feel that the movement, pressure, and the constant offense is going to give, if it doesn't get stopped, it's going to give Aguilar, he's going to look better in the eyes of the judges. So I think Jesus Aguilar gets a decision in this.
Yeah, that kind of surprises me. I'm surprised that you went with Aguilar here. I'm actually going to go with Sumudaerji here, and I mean it's clear to everybody, obviously, the size, the discrepancy, and the reach here in this matchup. But I do agree with Carlos. Obviously, Aguilar is usually the shorter fighter in most of his fights, but a 10-inch reach advantage in the way that Sumudaerji fights, I think, is hard for me to ignore. Aguilar, obviously, fantastic guillotine. You leave your neck out there, he will choke you. Good wrestler, and I think he's got a good, powerful overhand right. But I think that Sumudaerji has shown an improvement in his takedowns, in his wrestling. He's seen that being a hole in his grappling, and he's been away and he's worked on that. And I think we saw that a little bit in his previous fight, in his last two fights to be specific. But I think the height and reach is too much to ignore here. Sumudaerji, obviously, against Kevin Borjas, obviously in that fight he looked good, blasting kicks from range, fighting on the outside, using his long-range weapons, and I think that he can definitely do that against Aguilar here, fighting on the outside and using that range. Mitch Raposo as well, obviously in that fight he was able to defend most of those takedowns, and if this was the Sumudaerji from years prior, year and a half, 2 years ago, I'd probably be picking Aguilar as well. But I think his takedown defense has improved enough. His fight IQ in his previous fights, in terms of his kickboxing, I think is going to be well and truly better than Aguilar's in terms of him being able to poke and prod at range. And I think realistically that Aguilar is going to struggle to get on the inside and really land damaging shots. And I think that he's going to be shooting from a distance here, and he's going to be getting his face jabbed off while getting his legs chewed up. And I just don't really see a way that Aguilar is going to be able to take this fight to the ground. The only way I really see it happening is if in some sort of scramble or some sort of way that Sumudaerji engages in the grappling and leaves his neck out for him to be guillotined. Aguilar is a guy that is live to guillotine anybody, but I'm going to pick Sumudaerji to kind of win a decision here, kind of poking and prodding on the outside, using his long-range weapons, and ultimately keeping this fight standing. And next up at UFC 326, we got Cody Durden taking on Nyamjargal Tumendemberel. Carlos, who you got in this one?
I'm going to go with Cody Durden in this one. He's tough, he's durable, good wrestling. He's got strong overhand, early in the fight. Likes to pressure, and I think he's going to impose himself on Tumendemberel with the wrestling. If it gets to that, I think Tumendemberel has very good ground abilities. He's got a lot of submission attempts, and he's got some submission wins. But I do feel that Durden's not going to have to worry about that too much. I think his ground is just a little bit more high level, and I think he's going to get him in that ground and pound position once they're down there. But on the feet, I just feel like Tumendemberel throws like he's wild, even when he's being technical, because he's looking for the opening, but he just can't help it but swing those shots wide, whether it's a kick or a punch, and it just looks like he's crazy. And Cody Durden is just a little bit more technical. After he throws that overhand right, he may throw like a left hook over it, but he'll probably just go for a takedown. You know what I mean? So, and do the damage down there. So I feel that would be a better route for him to go. Take Tumendemberel down, start beating him up on the ground. And if you can land that overhand right in the beginning over one of Tumendemberel's wild strikes, go ahead and do so. It's going to be there. So I'm going to take Durden to get this one done.
Yeah, I've always been a fan of Tumendemberel. Obviously, he's a household name in Mongolia. If you've never heard of this guy, I don't know how. Where have you been? You must have been living under a rock. But I feel sorry for anybody that's got to be an announcer and say that guy's name with some emphasis inside the cage. I feel sorry for you, Bruce. But ultimately, going with Cody Durden here, he's a guy that I think we can all agree he's had a little bit of a tough run recently. I question the durability. That vicious knee, was it left hook? With the knee as well, with Jose Ochoa, was absolutely vicious. And at 34, obviously he did lose to Joshua Van, who doesn't at this point, and obviously got submitted on short notice against Nascimento, but he looked good in that fight going into it. He had good pace in that fight. Obviously a good wrestler, a guy that can definitely land that big overhand right, like Carlos mentioned. And in this matchup, obviously, against a guy like Tumendemberel, obviously a judo background with Sambo as well. I believe when I watched tape on him, that they said he finished third in Mongolia in judo, and obviously he's also competed at high level in Sambo. But I do think that Durden can definitely get into some wrestling scrambles here and ultimately get into that ground and pound position like Carlos mentioned. I think on the feet, Tumendemberel is a guy that has heavy forward pressure and he throws a lot of wild strikes, but it's not fundamental. It's not necessarily, putting out a jab, getting feelers, go into the body. He just wants to hurt you. When you look at Tumendemberel, he's a guy that wants to finish you and always go for the finish. And I think he kind of got a little bit exposed when he had his UFC debut against Carlos Hernandez. Carlos Hernandez is a guy that, he will take you down and get into a dominant position. And Tumendemberel didn't have an answer for that. He's always looking to finish you, but if he's getting controlled or he's just having kind of a wild, aggressive exchange and a guy level changes or he has better defense, Tumendemberel seems to struggle. And my only real question mark with Durden at this point is, has his chin gone? What's his durability like? Where's his head out on a 3-fight losing streak? But I am going to pick Cody Durden here. I think ultimately he's fought the much tougher level of competition. I think Tumendemberel is a guy that's all aggression, always looking for a finish. And I think that Durden can kind of neutralize that by just, staying safe, fighting behind a jab, having heavy forward pressure himself, and ultimately getting into a dominant position on the ground. I think he's the better overall wrestler. I do think that Durden at this point is kind of a question mark. He's not a guy that I'm necessarily going to be rushing to the window to bet here as an underdog, but I do think he can get it done here. This is a step down in competition that I think he can definitely capitalize on. Just don't leave your neck out there. Obviously, Tumendemberel does have nice front chokes as well, but give me Cody Durden to get this one done. And next up at UFC 326, we've got Ricky Turcios taking on Alberto Montes. Carlos, who you got in this one?
I'm going to take Montes in this one. Montes is debuting, so you never know how the octagon jitters will affect him, if at all. Not a big puncher, but he keeps a nice high guard, and he has very good counter fighting in the pocket that can force Turcios to have to shoot, which, then will make him a victim of an anaconda choke or a Darce choke, which Montes actually has a couple of finishes with. Seem to be what he's looking for in the submission department. Since Turcios reaches for takedowns and he bends at the waist, that could leave that opening for Montes to get the submission. So I do like Turcios. I think he's a lot of pressure. He doesn't have big power either. I just think that he's never really looking for a finish. He's just looking to keep the energy, keep the pace going. But Montes is looking to see if he can get any type of submission he can. And if he's on top, he's looking to keep that ground control. So I'm going to take Montes to get this one done.
Yeah, 2 for Montes here. Ricky Turcios is a guy, as Carlos mentioned, more of a high-volume striker, heavy pressure, uses his cardio as a weapon, but good in the scrambles, and ultimately to get fights to the ground. His wrestling is sloppy, and I think he's definitely going to be a victim of the Montes anaconda. As Carlos mentioned, great front chokes on the guy, good anacondas, good darces, and it's definitely his go-to submission. And I could definitely see it happening here. This is very much one of these fights that if you're a guy that breaks down MMA, if you're a guy that watches tape and kind of has your own picks, this is a fight where you see time and time again Ricky Turcios shoots in for sloppy takedowns, and I think that he leaves his neck exposed, especially late in fights, and I do think that Montes is definitely going to be live here to find some sort of submission. Might be a prop worth watching if you're a bettor. And I do think on the feet as well that Montes is a guy that, he's got decent kickboxing, very nice kicks, really nice counter striking as well. Turcios is a guy that isn't known for his power, so you've got a guy that's going to really just pressure and have a lot of volume against a guy that's always looking for a finish and tends to get it. So give me Montes here, training out of the Goat Shed. Love the name. Training over there with Gillian Roberts, and his grappling's, pretty decent. His chokes are pretty decent, and I like his counter-striking ability. So I definitely think a guy like Turcios isn't going to give him too many problems. So give me Montes here to get this one done. Get it for the goat shed, baby.
Last thing.
And next up at UFC 326, we've got Cody Brundage stepping in on short notice, taking on Donte Johnson. Carlos, who you got in this one?
This was a tough one to pick for me, but I thought that I'm going to go with Donte Johnson. He's hot right now. He's getting better every time he's in the cage. I know they say he has some wrestling to go with some of that big power that he has. The power, he doesn't know how to accurately throw it right on the button, but he does wing those hands, and if it lands, he's going to hurt you. The reason why I'm not too confident is because Brundage could do the same thing. He's got a heavy right hand, and he can out-wrestle Johnson if it goes to the ground and keep the standing. Whether that benefits Brundage or not, whether he's confident in the conditioning he has to step in on short notice, I'm not too sure. So that's why I'm going to go with Johnson. But I do think they talk about Johnson's, his wrestling background. I'm not sure how credentialed it is. I'm not sure how technical he gets. I just know that he's athletic. If he's got a little bit of a base, he can explode out of certain positions. Might be difficult for Brundage to hold him down, or it might be difficult for him to keep Brundage down. But either way, when he gets back to the feet, he's alive too. And I think that Johnson's going to push the pace, whether he wants to or not. That's all he knows. And I think he can land something and put Cody Brundage on Queer Street. So I'm going to take Johnson in this one.
Yeah, I'm going to stick to the usual trend here for me on the Ground and Pound podcast, where anybody with a pulse I'm taking against Cody Brundage. But give me Johnson here. I think he's the better athlete. I think he's very explosive, and we've seen, obviously, that he does have some wrestling in the back pocket. Obviously, I'm with Carlos. I haven't necessarily seen the high-level wrestling that they've talked about with Johnson, but the guy is a good athlete, and he can definitely crack. My only real knock on him is that at 185, at 5'8", he is a little tank, but he is a little bit undersized. And I do agree with Carlos in the sense that Brundage does have some wrestling that he can fall back on and kind of just keep him in the fight with the wrestling. But ultimately, I don't necessarily trust the durability of Cody Brundage. We've seen him get finished from time and time again. I think Johnson is very live early. I do think that he comes out, hot, especially in round one, where a lot of his power is. And I do think out of the two that if this fight gets dragged into deep waters, that Brundage, he's not necessarily the best athlete, but he can get guys tired. He can hang in there, but ultimately, I just don't think he's going to survive the first two rounds here with Johnson. I think on the feet, Brundage is definitely fundamentally sound enough to kind of stay safe. But I think Johnson is a guy that's going to press you. He's going to get in your face. He knows that he doesn't have the reach to be able to get at a lot of his opponents. So he knows that he has to get on the inside and have the good forward pressure. And to me, if Brundage is a guy that's kind of backing up and kind of being the one forced back in a fight, he's definitely going to get caught at some point. Johnson does a good job of ripping to the body as well. And to me, I look at this matchup and I say, this is a guy that they're throwing in to just give Johnson an opponent on a pay-per-view card. Brundage, to me, is not a guy that I'm ever going to look to back. If you're losing a split decision against Eric McCornaco, I don't trust you against hardly anybody, and that's not a knock on Eric McCornaco. I just don't think he's UFC level either. So give me Donte Johnson here to get this one done. Full camp as well. The better athlete, the better wrestler ultimately, and I think he finds the finish inside of 2 rounds. And next up at UFC 326, we've got Long Xiao taking on Cody No Love Garbrandt. Carlos, who are you going with?
I'm just going to say not too confident about it, but what I'm going to say is Xiao likes to stay on the feet, and I feel Garbrandt has the speed advantage in this one, and he's looking to counter. Anything that Xiao throws, he's looking to come down the middle, find the opening, and I feel Garbrandt's going to find it, and the only questionable thing that Cody Garbrandt has is if Xiao hits him, how does his chin hold up? That's the only thing that makes me a little nervous about it. But I think Garbrandt he could find a way to hurt Xiao and get him out of there. Or even if he doesn't get him out of there, he's going to make Xiao think about coming in, which will make him hesitate. And it'll look bad in the eyes of the judges. And I just feel that Garbrandt I think he can do some damage in this one. And it'd be good to see him get that victory. So I'm going to take Garbrandt. I think he's just too fast, and the counters are there for him. And Xiao does leave the opening. So let's get it done, Garbrandt.
Yeah, 2 for Garbrandt here, in my opinion. Former dog of the week. Let us down in that one, but I think he gets it done in this one. Long Xiao is a guy that he wants to stand and trade on the feet. He looks a little bit he's one of these guys that he wants to stand and really land and plant his feet. He's not a guy that really moves his feet and steps into his shots, in my opinion. I do think that Garbrandt is going to have a huge speed advantage. You saw that in the Barcelos fight, that even though Barcelos is a good athlete himself, that he was able to kind of step into the pocket and really kind of exchange on his own terms. And I think that even though he is obviously at the ripe age of 34, not necessarily a guy that you're looking to kind of go to the window and really bet the house on at 34, but he still carries that speed. He still has the boxing. And I think that Xiao is a guy that obviously, because he wants to stand and trade, he's going to be following Garbrandt around as he circles on the outside, kind of picking and prodding and kind of darting in and out of range. And I do think as well that one of the kryptonites, especially at this point in Garbrandt's career, is obviously guys that want to come in and wrestle him, take him down. We saw that with Barcelos, that obviously the threat of the takedown was there. And obviously as well with Davidson Figueiredo, he was able to take him down and ultimately find the submission. With Long Zhao, it's not necessarily on the table. He can wrestle, but he wants to stand and trade with you. And I think that's why they've put this matchup together. It's a guy that he doesn't have to necessarily worry too much about the wrestling. He's a guy that's much more hittable. And I do think that Cody Garbrandt here should be able to get back in the win column here. This is a step down in competition for him. And I do think realistically that out of the two, when you look at Jeong, he is a guy that, as the fight kind of progresses, he tends to slow down. He's a guy that doesn't necessarily have a ton of volume late in the fight. And I think as long as Cody Garbrandt's chin holds up, I'm right there with Carlos, as long as it holds up, he should be absolutely fine in this matchup. It's kind of crazy to me that Garbrandt, especially, given the pedigree of who he's fought, the who's who, that he's the underdog in this matchup, as a slight underdog. Ronnie Barcelos, last opponent, no shame in that. Davidson Figueiredo, no shame in losing there. Brian Kelleher with the win there. He don't get me wrong, he's beating guys that aren't necessarily all that great, but Jeong is not a guy that's I don't even think he's the UFC level. He's one of these road to UFC guys. Don't make me go on a rant about road to UFC, but his only victory is against Quang Lee, and that guy's 0-3 inside the UFC, or 1-3. So not necessarily all that high on Long Zhao, but give me Cody Garbrandt here to get this one done. No love, get back in the win column, baby. Come on now. And next up at UFC 326, we've got Gregory Rodrigues taking on Brunno Ferreira. Carlos, who you got in this one?
I'm going to go with Brunno Ferreira in this one. And it's not because of what he did in his last fight. It's because of how he was able to get there. And it's just the fact that Ferreira likes to move a lot. He's never in one position all the time. And Robocop's just a little stiff. You know what I mean? He keeps his range with his striking, likes to stay long. But if you like to stay long against a guy that likes to bounce around, you got to find your range at some point. And the only way to do that is to cut off the ring. And unless Rodrigues learns to cut off the ring, I don't know how he's going to find that range. And then when it gets to the ground, I just think Ferreira is just too quick for him to get in there and get him on the ground. So do I think it's going to be another stoppage like that? I don't think so. But I do think that Ferreira just being busier is probably going to squeak out the decision again. Not squeak it out. I think he's going to get a decision. I just think it's a little difficult for someone like Rodrigues to keep someone like Ferreira in one spot and go to work. I think that's where the problem is, and I don't think he has an answer for that yet.
I'm surprised. I'm not going to lie. I'm going with RoboCop here. Give me Gregory Rodrigues. I love some dissension. I like to get the two opinions of both fighters. I think Ferreira's a good fighter, don't get me wrong. Obviously good on the ground, has power in the right hand, but I think Gregory Rodrigues is going to be far too big here. We know the grappling pedigree of RoboCop, a guy that's obviously very credentialed on the ground, big for the weight class as well at 185. I want to know what he fights at after his weight cut, because he's got to be in the plus. He looks like he's about 225 pounds. The guy is huge, and I think that he's just going to be able to smother Ferreira. He's going to be too big for him. Obviously, the height in terms of the 5-inch, the height discrepancy here doesn't really favor too much in the reach, but I think Rodrigues is just going to be too big. He's going to always walk down his opponents. He's a guy that has a really tight, heavy guard, and he wants to be able to walk you down and really just pressure you and back you up against the fence. And I just think Ferreira doesn't have a whole lot other than that overhand right to really kind of get the respect of Rodrigues. And to me, if he wants to mix in the grappling, I think he can definitely kind of muscle him to the mat and beat him up there on the ground early. You saw as well with Rodrigues when he fought Cannonier, he was able to really land the power shot, and I think he's very live for a knockout early, and Ferreira's just going to struggle with that. If the fight gets dragged later into this one, I definitely think that Ferreira's going to be live. Obviously, we know with Rodrigues that he tends to slow as fights go on. He's trying to kind of pace himself a little bit. We saw that in his previous fight, that obviously go into decision. But I like that he's kind of taking that on board. That says to me that he's not going all gas, no brakes in fights now. And I think that he can come out here, be a little bit more measured, and ultimately find the finish. And I think that he knows now that he can, trust his gas tank to be able to at least fight 3 rounds comfortably. And obviously, I think on the ground, he's probably the better all-out jiu-jitsu practitioner. And I think in terms of the size discrepancy along with the power, he's going to have the advantage there. And I just think it's going to be one of these fights where, Ferreira, dancing around on the outside doesn't suit him. He's going to be having to avoid some big shots from a very large gentleman in terms of Gregory Rodrigues. And ultimately, I think that's a recipe for disaster. And he's not going to take those shots well, and he's not going to be able to gain the respect unless he clips RoboCop late in this one. So give me RoboCop to get this one done. And next up at UFC 326, we've got Drew Dober taking on Michael Johnson. Carlos, who you got in this one?
I'm going to go with Michael Johnson in this one. I think that striking-wise, he's going to have the speed. I think he's going to have the power. And, he's got the faster feet. He can move in and out. He can get away from you. Wrestling-wise, I don't think you're going to have to worry about too much wrestling here, but I feel that, Johnson is going to be very difficult to take down. Dober's going to have a hard time keeping up with him since he doesn't like to cut the ring off. Getting Michael Johnson in one place, the new Michael Johnson, his defensive ability, where he likes to move defensively, he's creating that distance between Dober. Dober doesn't cut the ring off. It's going to be a problem for him. And I feel that he's going to catch Dober early. He's probably going to hurt him. And I don't think he's going to finish him. He can, but I don't think he's going to finish him. I just think he's probably going to find a way to ding him in every round and probably get the decision that way. I just feel that Dober doesn't see that right hand coming down. It's going to be too fast, too quick. And I don't think he's going to be able to stop it defensively, even though defensively sometimes he's sharp and sometimes he likes to eat a shot. Just the way he's been looking in his last couple of fights, Dober looks like he's slowed down a little bit as well. So I'm going to take Johnson to get it done.
Yeah, 2 for Johnson here. Do it for the culture, Michael Johnson. We all know what Drew Dober thinks of black people. Go look it up, people. I'm going with Johnson here. I think this fight really just comes down to the fact that we've got a guy in Johnson. I think he's going to have the speed advantage. If this comes down to mostly striking, which I think it will, both guys not necessarily known for their wrestling, Johnson will take fights to the mat if he needs to. We saw that in one of his previous fights against Darius Flowers. Dober, as Carlos hit the nail on the head, is a guy he wants to plant and really land big shots. He throws kind of big hooks. He'll rip to the body. He wants to get you backed up against the fence and really just, kind of tee off on you. And I just think with Johnson, he's not going to sit still. He's not going to be in one place for Dober to be able to plant his feet. And I think that Johnson, with the speed advantage, he's also a guy that throws straight shots straight down the pipe. Nice jab, nice follow-up 1-2. And I think realistically, Dober's going to be kind of swinging the air while Johnson's just kind of picking and prodding with straight shots. And he was able to survive against Daniel Zellhuber and ultimately win that decision quite comfortably in the boxing. So a guy like Drew Dober doesn't necessarily pose too much of a threat, in my opinion, unless Dober is able to land a big shot. And obviously the questionable chin of Johnson kind of rears its ugly head here. Then obviously it's always live in a sport like MMA. But I do think that Johnson could, mix in some grappling if he wants to, kind of wear on the gas tank of Drew Dober as well. He does look like he kind of slows down in fights. And to be honest with you, when you go back and look at that Prepolek fight, Kyle Prepolek is not a guy that I was very high on. I know Carlos and I have spoken about him previously, the Canadian. Not a good athlete, not a guy that I thought, was anything special. And Drew Dober made that look very difficult. Prepolek was winning a lot, especially early in the first 2 rounds, and ultimately was able to find the finish, I believe, in the third. Johnson is a guy that, he's coming off of probably or arguably one of his best wins in recent memory. So give me Johnson here. I think Dober is going to be swinging the air. I think Johnson's going to be picking and prodding on the outside. He's going to be much faster. And even though he's 2 years his senior, I do think obviously with the height and reach that the straight shots of Johnson are going to find the mark. And I wouldn't be surprised again if Dober gets knocked out here. So give me Michael Johnson to get this one done. And next up at UFC 326, we've got Raul Rojas Jr. taking on Rob Font. Carlos, who you got in this one?
This fight, I'm going to take Font to get it done. I just feel that Rosas he's going to get some takedowns. He's going to get takedowns based on like youth and energy, because in the first round he's just going to be all energy in those takedowns and he's going to get it. And he may get 1 or 2 like we talked about, but I think by round about 2 and 3, I don't think he's going to be able to get any more of those takedowns. Not because he's going to be fatigued or tired. I think he's going to start giving up on some of the takedowns because he's going to realize, like, I can't keep Font down once I get him there, and he's going to realize how hard it is to get him back down in the first round. So he's going to be forced to kind of fight, or it's just going to be kind of like a clinch war up against the cage. And I think on the feet, even in the clinch, I think Font's going to have the advantage. I think on the feet, Rojas has made strides to get better, but I just don't think that. I don't think he's going to be able to stand with Font on the feet, and it's going to force him to dive for takedowns. And then Font's going to see them coming a mile away, and he's going to have to start winging punches, which is going to leave him open to get countered. And I just see Rob Font getting the better of him in those exchanges and in those scenarios. So I'm going to take Font to get it done.
Yeah, two for Font here. Obviously, we know the Chihuahua. We know the Chihuahua train's probably coming to an end here, in my opinion. I think Rob Font's got all the skills to get this one done. Raul Rojas Jr., obviously, good grappler, but Carlos and I were talking about this one before recording, and I personally don't think that his grappling is up to par enough to be able to keep Rob Font down for the course of, 2 out of the 3 rounds here. I agree with Carlos as well. He said, that he might get takedowns early in this one, but ultimately not be able to keep him down throughout the course of the fight. And I think Rob's got all the forward pressure and all the boxing that he needs to be able to capitalize on the feet. We've seen with Raul Rojas Jr. that he did get tagged. I believe it was the Noche event. I think it was against Quang Lee. He got rocked in that one on the feet, and I do think that Rob is a much more technical boxer than Quang Lee. And ultimately, sorry, not Quang Lee, what's his name? Halatong Hae Lee, excuse me. And I do think that Rob Font can capitalize in the boxing. I do think that he has enough power and enough forward pressure to make it difficult for Raul Rojas Jr. to be able to get constant takedowns. And we know his game plan is to come out and grapple you, kind of take you back and dominate you in that position. And realistically, when you look at level of competition, you go through Rob Font's resume, he's fighting guys that, win or lose, he's fighting a much higher level of opponent. David Martinez lost there, but he's fighting and beating Gene Matsumoto. And that's a guy that, in Gene Matsumoto, that I think would smoke Raul Rojas Jr. He's beating guys like Kyle Phillips as well. Again, another guy that I think could maybe make an argument there that Raul Rojas Jr. might struggle against a guy like Kyle Phillips. So I think the big step up in competition here for Raul Rojas Jr. is definitely valid, but I just think he's still got a lot to work on. He's not necessarily a guy that I trust in the striking. I think that he's decent on the ground, good at controlling people, but this step up in competition, regardless of the big age gap here, I think the old vet gets this one done here, and I think a lot of people are going to rush to, kind of bet the younger gentleman here at 21, but ultimately I think Rob Font gets this one done in the striking, keeping it on the feet, and shows that there is levels, and Raul Rojas Jr. is not there yet. And that brings us to the co-main event here for UFC 326. We've got Caio Borralho taking on Reinier de Ridder. And if you're enjoying the content, hit that like and subscribe button, as Carlos is going to let us know who he's got in the co-main event.
This one I went with Caio Borralho to get it done. I just find Borralho should be able to do exactly what Brendan Allen did, as we were talking about. He should be able to strike decently on the feet. And on the ground, he should be able to keep himself safe, being inside mount or half guard, and stay out of trouble of the submission game of de Ridder. Keep his shoulders pinned to the ground, throw some ground and pound, because Borralho is live to do some ground and pound. He's done it before. And de Ridder, defensively, the way he moves his body, he's kind of like Gumby. He's a big guy, but he's pretty rubbery on the bottom, and he's just trying to get his body in weird positions so he can get back to his feet once he's down there on the bottom, or to get to a better position on top. But I just think that Borralho's striking should be a lot better, especially fighting somebody like Imavov. I feel like, you at some point you start to get a little bit of a rub when you start losing to fighters that are better than you in certain parts of the game. And I feel like his striking, he's going to get a lot better after his last fight. He's going to see things a little clearer. He's going to want to set up shots a little better. And I feel that his ground game is probably going to equal de Ridder on the ground. De Ridder's a very big guy, and he should be able to, at least get this to the ground once or twice in those awkward takedowns that he has. And I just got to worry about Borralho. Those knees of de Ridder are very dangerous, but if Borralho doesn't allow himself to extend his arms or keep a high guard, it shouldn't be that much of a problem, avoiding de Ridder's Derrida's knees. Plus, if he doesn't let Derrida close the distance or he doesn't like back himself up against the cage, I don't see that happening. So I'm going to take Borralho. I think he can get this done.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
Have Viagra or similar products let you down? Well, now there is new hope for men who suffer from erectile dysfunction. If you want proven results, the Boston Medical Group has the answer.
At the Boston Medical Group, I met with a specialist who understood what I was going through.
Regardless of your age or medical condition, the Boston Medical Group can safely restore your sexual potency, even if other treatments have failed.
The Boston Medical Group solved my problem in just one visit.
The Boston Medical Group. Proven results or your consultation is free.
Yeah, two for Caio Borralho here, in my opinion. Obviously, the fighting nerds fighter here needs to get back on track. Reinier Derrida, we know, obviously, again, losing to Brandon Allen, but in a manner that I don't really feel confident going and picking him here. So I have to go with Borralho. I didn't really like how that one ended with Brandon Allen, obviously him retiring on the stool. And I think here with Borralho, he's got all the credentials and all the skills here to be able to capitalize. On the feet, my only real question mark is that Borralho is a guy that he tends to be a little bit low output. You see him kind of darting in and out of range, kind of looking to capitalize on guys on the feet. And he's a guy that, he's not necessarily known for his one-punch power. He has it, but I don't necessarily know if he can capitalize against a guy like Derrida. He crashes the pocket. He wants to come in and get into the clinch and ultimately find the takedowns. And I do think that Borralho might get suckered into that, knowing that he has a good ground game himself. I do think that he can stay safe. I agree with Carlos that he's definitely, a guy that can, get into side control, get into guard, and use ground and pound, get his own ground game going. But I think that plays into the hands of Derrida, and I think realistically where this fight, for me, I would like to see it play out is for Borralho to be able to keep this one on the feet, dart in and out of range, and ultimately when Derrida decides to crash the pocket, he looks to counter strike. But I just worry that Derrida kind of crashes the pocket, makes it a kind of a greasy, sweaty fight, a dirty back and forth brawl in which he has more volume. Borralho is a guy that I think might get suckered into the clinch a little bit. So not necessarily super confident here in Caio Borralho, but I think he has all the skills to be able to capitalize, get the striking going, keep this one on the feet, whereas I think he's the better athlete as well. And I think ultimately that tall man defense for Derrida is going to leave him exposed for Borralho's right hand. So I say that Derrida, he can definitely win this one if he gets this fight to the mat, but I'm going to say Borralho is going to keep this one standing and ultimately win in the striking with the speed and athleticism that he possesses. And that brings us to the main event here for UFC 326. The baddest motherfucker is on the line. Charles Oliveira taking on Max Holloway in the main event. And if you're enjoying the content, hit that like and subscribe button, as Carlos is going to let you know who he's got in the main event.
I'm going to end up going with Holloway in this one. 155 tends to hit a little bit harder. Oliveira tends to get hit. I don't see Oliveira being able to get Max in any type of compromising position to get him to the ground, or on the ground get him in any type of position that can be advantageous for a submission. I don't know. I just don't see it. I just see Oliveira, I think, is it sounds stupid, but I think he's in his mind, he's thinking this is for the fans, and he feels like he's going to stay on the feet and try to go toe-to-toe with Holloway just because it's the BMF title. And I think he's going to get stopped again, unfortunately. I like Charles Oliveira, but, I don't think he's going to take the smart route in this one and try to find a way to get it to the ground. I think he's going to try to make it a show on the feet, and that favors Holloway, and Holloway's probably going to get the stoppage. What do you got, brother?
Yeah, my heart says Charles, my head says Max, so I'm going with Max Holloway here. I flip-flopped on this one, I'm not going to lie, but I think ultimately if you're rushing to the window to bet Charles in this one, you got to ask yourself, how is he going to win this one on the feet? He needs to take this fight to the ground, and Max has got renowned for his takedown defense. He's got good movement on the outside. I agree with Carlos as well at 155. He tends to hit a little bit harder, and he's done a good job of being able to utilize kicks throughout his career, and I think that's becoming a real weapon, especially at range. He does a good job of tapping the low kick now as well. And I think with Oliveira, you have to look at this matchup and say, Charles is very live for a submission against anybody, no matter who it is. We saw against Arman Sarukian, he was able to get him in an oh-shit guillotine. And obviously he was able to choke out Matus Gamrot in this previous fight. But I don't see him being able to get Max Holloway to the ground, controlling him, backpacking, and ultimately subbing him. I obviously know here that Charles is decent on the feet. He's a shooter box guy. He wants to, kind of walk you down and have aggressive style. And I think that obviously serves well for a BMF title fight that's good for the fans. But I think that also makes it, he's going to have openings now that Max is going to have openings, that he's going to be able to capitalize as the better boxer, as the guy that, is going to be able to capitalize on those openings for a guy that, at 36 years old, we've seen him get stopped now. We've seen him get hit and dropped in multiple fights. Don't get me wrong, he's been able to come back, but Max is a guy that, he has measured pressure. He uses his ability to be able to stop you. He doesn't just wing punches. He knows exactly what he's doing. He's very calculated. He can fight 5 rounds. His takedown defense is absolutely stellar, and I think he keeps this one on the feet. I think he outboxes Charles, and I think ultimately, I agree with Carlos. I think this one is for the fans. I think this is, one of Charles's last, sort of hurrahs, which is sad to say, but I think ultimately we could be looking at a Charles Oliveira stoppage here, and ultimately Max Holloway getting another BMF title fight, later on down the road as he keeps his belt here. And if you're enjoying the content, hit that like and subscribe button. Let us know in the comments section who you're going with here for the BMF title, Max Holloway, Charles Oliveira. Let us know in the comments section. And Carlos is going to let you know what you need to do if you enjoy the content.
Guys, we hope you enjoy the content, number one. And if you do enjoy it, please don't forget to like and subscribe. And we will see you on the next one.
We'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.
Peace.